Hello, welcome to Keith's Pi Tutorials. I'm Keith Ellis. Today this is my second part of my SSH tutorial, so if you haven't seen it, please head over and check out part 1, which takes you through the basics of using SSH or secure shell. Today I'll be covering a few more advanced topics. Number 1 will be an easy way to copy our public keys from our local machine to our remote machine. Number 2 will be to add passwords to our public keys file, so we can have one single password on our public key and be able to log into several remotes with only one password. Number 3 will be to disallow logging into a remote machine with a password. So what this does is basically explicitly says you must have keys set up to log in, so it's a little bit of additional security. And finally, I'll be going through using X forwarding over an SSH connection, which is very handy if you want to run a graphical window or a graphical app over an SSH connection that you haven't got VNC installed or you don't want to set up VNC. So, hope you enjoy it. So to start with, we're going to recap with how we left it on the first part. We can log in on our Pi just using the SSH command with our username and IP address, and we've already set up authorized keys, so we can log straight in without using our password. Now, what I'm going to show you now is how you can easily add a second login or second computer to your Raspberry Pi to the authorized keys file. So we're just going to look at the authorized keys file here now. This is the file on the Raspberry Pi, and there's just one key there, which is my MacBook on my Pi Tutorials account. So to try this out, I'm going to switch accounts to my standard Keith Ellis account. So I'm now going to take a look at the .ssh directory on my Keith Ellis account now. So we've got authorized keys in there. We've got the public and private keys, so I've already generated them. So I'm now going to log into my Pi, and you'll see this time we're asked for a password, so the Raspberry Pi doesn't know about my public key on this account. So we need to get the public key over to the Raspberry Pi. So as before, in the part 1 of this tutorial, I'm going to use the scp command, which is a secure copy, and we'll copy the public key from this directory over to the Pi, the IP address, and we need that colon, and we're going to copy into the home directory, and then the .ssh directory, and I'm going to call it temp. So the public key from my MacBook will be copied over to the Raspberry Pi, and it will be called temp. So I'll type in my password, that copies across pretty quick, and now log into my Raspberry Pi. So change into our .ssh directory and do a ls, and you can see my authorized keys file and the temp file, which I've just copied across from my MacBook. Just in the authorized keys, just open up that and make sure there's a space, there's a new line underneath the existing key. What we're going to do now is use the cat command, so cat temp, and then 2 greater than signs, which will append the temp file to the authorized key file. Now if we go and have a look in there, you can see there's the 2 keys there, 2 public keys, one from my Keith Ellis account and one from my Pi Tutorials account. And then we can remove the temp file and log out. So now if we try logging into the Raspberry Pi from my Keith Ellis account, we've now got the public key on our Raspberry Pi and we've logged in without a password. So that's quite a nice way of showing how you can append information to an existing file. So up next I'm going to show you how to add a password to your private key on your host computer. So I'm in the SSH directory on my PyTutorials account here. And you can see there's a public private key. I'm then going to run the command SSH-keygen space -p, and it asks us which file the key is in. Just accept the default there, which is the ID_RSA file, which is that private key. It then asks for a password, so I've typed my password in, and then I have to confirm it. And it tells us there identification has been saved with a new passphrase. So I'm now going to log in to my Raspberry Pi, and you'll see this time on my Mac it's the private key is protected with a password, so I have to type in my password now, and I've got an option there to remember the key in my keychain. I'm going to opt not to do that at the moment, and there I've logged in. So quite a good advantage of this, rather than having to type your Raspberry Pi password in every time, you don't have to. I can keep logging out and logging in, and I won't have to type my password now until I reboot my Mac. It will remember that password. But then next time, if I want to log into my Raspberry Pi again, it will ask for my private key password. So there's more security involved in there, but at the same time I don't have to type my password in every time. So I'm going to show you another security option now, and this is to disable logging into your Raspberry Pi with a password. So this will you'll only be allowed to log into your Raspberry Pi if you've set up public private keys. So this information is kept in a config file, which can be found in /etc/sshd_config. So if you open that up in Nano, there's quite a lot of information in here. So there's the port number there, which by default SSH works on port 22, but you can change that to suit yourself. And I'll just scroll through here. There's, it's worth you having a look at this just to see what options there are available to you. So one of the options shown here, you'll see it near the top of the screen, is permit root login, yes. You could change that yes for a no, and that would disable root being able to log in over SSH. So that, combined with changing your Pi username and putting a secure password on there, that will help prevent unauthorized access through your SSH connection. So in the middle of the screen there you can see another option called X11 forwarding, yes. I'll talk about X forwarding later, but it's really handy, so it's worth checking to see whether you've got that set to yes or not, depending on whether you want to use the options I'll show you later. So the reason we're in here is to disable logging in using passwords. So there's an option here called password authentication, and it's set to yes. I'm going to change that to no, and that won't let me log in to my Raspberry Pi using a password. It will expect a public private key. So we'll save that and exit. So I'm now going to restart the SSH service by using the command sudo service SSH restart, and that will make the changes we made to that config file take effect. So now if I try and log in to my Raspberry Pi from my PyTutorials account, you can see I've logged in fine, so I've got public private keys set up. So I'm going to exit. So I'm now going to demonstrate that we can't log into my Raspberry Pi with just a password. So let's log into the Pi. I'm going to change into the .ssh directory and open up the authorized key file with Nano. So we've got the two keys there, one from the PyTutorials account and one from a KeyFellis account. So the bottom one is the KeyFellis account. So if we use the command Control K, which deletes that or cuts that line out, and we'll save that file. So we've now no longer got a key stored for my KeyFellis account. So I've exited SSH. If I try and log back in with the standard command, I get an error, permission denied. So there we are. So I can only log in now if I've got keys set up. So that just gives you that extra little bit of security. So this last section here is discussing X forwarding over an SSH connection. Now this enables you to log into a remote computer over an SSH connection but still get a graphical interface. So it's similar to a VNC connection, but we don't need to run a VNC server, and you only get the one window of the command you're running. So it took me a little while to get this set up because I use a Mac. I knew the command I needed, but it just didn't seem to work. So eventually I discovered I need a bit of software on the Mac, which is an X window client. If you're on a Linux machine, you won't need an X window client. It runs under X window anyway, and if you want to do this on a Windows machine, you might want to try googling Xming, X-M-I-N-G. So I'm going to Google X window Mac here, and one of the search results was the Apple technical, and it gives you a link to Xcourts, which Apple used to maintain, but they've now put it out in the public domain, and it's now open source. So I'm going to download the Xcourts software and get that installed. So I'm now back on my Mac, and I'm typing in the standard SSH command, SSH username at IP address. I'm going to go back and modify it just slightly, so we'll put in an option -X. Now the X must be a capital. If we run that, because I've got authorized keys set up, it logs me in, and it looks pretty much like any other SSH session would look like. So it doesn't look any different. Doing ls command, you know, it's just working as it would normally. So we can do all the normal stuff we would over an SSH connection, but it's got a little added benefit. So for example, if we wanted to edit a text file and you were more familiar with the LeafPad text editor, we can just type LeafPad in, and then in our X window box there we've got LeafPad, which is, you know, a windowed GUI text editor running locally on our local machine, but it's got access to all the remote file structure. So it's as if you were sitting right in front of your remote machine, but we're running a graphical user program straight over an SSH connection. So another example, maybe you've got an Arduino connected up to your Raspberry Pi, and you want to program it directly from the Raspberry Pi. We can just type in Arduino. It'll bring up the Arduino IDE, which is running directly on the Mac. So if we've got any Arduino devices, maybe directly connected to the GPIO ports, you can, you know, load up your sketches. You could do whatever you like, whatever you normally do in the Arduino IDE. You can then flash them to the Arduino device and just, you know, use it as you normally would, but you're operating it remotely, so your remote device doesn't need a monitor, keyboard, mouse, and we can do all this headless, which is in my books a very good benefit. One of the downsides of X forwarding though is that you can't seem to run anything that needs sudo or root permissions. So I'm going to try load Synaptic here, which is a package manager which needs to be run as root. I'll get a message here saying starting without administration privileges. You can still load it up in this instance, but you can't make any changes, you can't remove apps, you can't install apps, etc. Now this app is fairly good and it warns you, but some other apps just won't even run. I can't get Scratch to run, so I think that needs some admin permissions. But other than that, it's a pretty good method of running programs on a remote machine. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and it's been useful. If you have, then please subscribe and check back, there'll be some more tutorials coming soon.